Hello, and welcome to our How to Safely and Fairly Command the Pitch. It's basically our HRing 101 panel. And we've got a great group of referees here with us today. My name is Ricky Nelson. I'll have each person give a short, just hi, my name is, and then we'll talk about their experience in refereeing a little bit later. Okay, Chris, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Chris LeCompte. I'm based in the Northeast.
Toby.
Hey, my name is Toby March. I am also based in the Northeast.
And Andrew.
My name is Andrew Canto, and surprisingly enough, I'm also based in the Northeast. So 3 Northeast refs here.
And 1 minute landing. Oh yeah. Okay. Great. Let me get us going for our panel. Okay, so just go into a little, here's some relevant experience for each of us. Everyone here has held some sort of leadership position in refereeing, has been refereeing for a long time. I think Andrew Canto and I are tied at 9 years, and everybody else are youngins at only 7 years in this sport. Come on, guys, keep up. Everyone's refed major tournaments, oftentimes the most kind of stressful games up into the finals, with varying levels of experience in USQ or IQA, notably coming from Toby, and then experience with both USQ and MLQ. I think Canto actually has the most interesting fact, which is that he has been assistant referee for every USQ finals since World Cup 5. Okay, now we're learning how to actually safely and fairly command a pitch. The most important thing is basically not to let this happen. So we're going to basically try and help you guys not let something like that happen, and more importantly, control the pitch so that everyone listens and everyone has a good game. Okay. Now, there we go. Okay, so I'm going to have each of us go through and tell us a little bit more detail about your career as a ref, how you got into it, what you see as the kind of best things about reffing, and just what you think is the most important experience you have. So I'll start us off. I got into refereeing at World Cup 5 in New York. And basically, there was a sweet jacket that they were giving to volunteers, and I wanted it. And so the thing I could do was referee. Basically started out as a goal ref and AR, and by the end of it, I was head reffing games. That was the training program back in the day. If you were on the pitch to ref, then they got you into it. Since then, I've gotten up to refereeing the USQ finals, and I definitely think that ensuring the game is safe, fair, and fun in that order is the most important thing about refereeing. Chris?
So I got into reffing in 2011. I refed this football league I was in because I thought all the refs were terrible and I could do better than they could. I found out quickly that it took more work than I thought to be better than they were. But that's why I got started in reffing. And then I joined Quidditch, and I decided to keep my skills up as a referee. It seemed like Quidditch needed a bunch of refs, and so I hopped in and helped out. And ever since, I've been trying to develop myself as a ref, try to get better, and try to travel to as many tournaments as I can get to. Yeah, and then I think some of the most interesting experiences I've had are traveling to like other regions. So I've refed in the Southwest and I've refed over in Europe, and going there and seeing how the refs from that region ref and how it's different from how I'm used to is always interesting and always helps develop me and to make me make intentional choices about the way I ref. And when I'm refing, I would say some of the things I think about are safety, fairness, and gameplay, and I apply them in that order. Right, safety first, last, and always. Then I want to be fair, and then I want to keep the game moving.
Toby?
Sure. Like Chris said, I got started in reffing because there was a shortage of referees in my region, and particularly in conference play, kind of away from what we think of as the major Quidditch hubs. So I was at World Cup 5, but I didn't actually start reffing for a few seasons after that, and found a niche that I really enjoyed. So I stuck with it and have been fortunate enough to be able to travel across the US, through Canada, across Europe for major Quidditch tournaments. I agree that the focus of refereeing has to be safety, fairness, and gameplay. The thing that I think I bring to it is like the hustle that comes into it. Like, always show that you're putting in the work. To like, showing that you're putting in the work helps the teams believe that you're like taking the game seriously. And a thing that I picked up from referees in the generation before me, like Kanto, is like always bring your best professional self to every game. So I'm really excited for this talk.
Okay, and Kanto.
Great. So I started refing in 2011 with World Cup 5. I was originally slated to be a ticket volunteer, but then they said they needed refs. So I had ref basketball. I umpired baseball in the past, and so that's where I kind of got my start in refing. And I'm really more known for an assistant ref, but as I've grown older with the sport, I've been driven towards the head refing side, and so I've been in a lot of ref development groups with ref training and administration. So it's been a great ride so far. And to what others have just said, the best part about refing is that you're never as good as you think you are, and so every time you get on that field, you learn something new about yourself. And the biggest challenge for us refs is just keeping up with the players, right? The players are getting stronger and faster and different kind of strategies, and so you got to be aware of all that stuff going into it. So it's definitely an exciting position, and it takes a lot of work, but there's a lot of payoff in the end.
And to kind of add some diversity, at the last second, Jeanette was added to the panel. So unfortunately, I don't have her in the previous slide. So Jeanette, if you could kind of join in with the same content.
Hi, I'm Jeanette. I'm from the Great Lakes region, just to give people, nobody probably knows who I am. But I am probably the youngest ref here. I started refing in 2016. I originally, this is like the biggest mistake I've ever made in my life. I was like, I'm going to take this ref test because another person on my team is taking it. So I'm going to do it. So then I went out and I made a big old fool of myself and did very bad refing. So then I was like, well, now I want to ref. And shout out to KT. She came up to me and was like, you can do it as a ref. It's like really hard to be a girl ref. So like I got really pumped up about it, and I actually read the rule book, got super into it. And like a lot of other people here on the panel, I was like, Great Lakes doesn't have a lot of refs. So then I really stuck to it. And then in 2016, I tore my ACL at the end of the year. And so I was like, well, I want to be included in Quidditch somehow. So coming back in my junior year of college, I studied, passed the ref test, and then the rest is history. I've been in HR ever since, and it's kind of addicting now. And I kind of I like being on the pitch and making sure that we're being respected and represented.
So, I think the first thing that is good to start out with is, how can you call everything that happens? How can you know all the rules? It's a very daunting task, and I think people expect it of referees. And what are the best ways to achieve this, or something to this effect? Chris, why don't you start us off?
Yeah, so I'm gonna have a pretty spicy take here, and my answer is that I don't know all of the rules. I can't possibly memorize that whole thing. What I generally do is I group similar rules in my head. I know all the physical contact fouls are yellow cards, and if they're really bad, there's a couple of red cards. So anytime I see an illegal physical contact, I know that it's a yellow. Procedural fouls are mostly blue cards. And so I know that when someone does a procedural foul or an illegal interaction foul, it's usually a blue card. Sometimes I know fouls, a turnover would solve the foul. And while I'm not certain in my head if it's a blue card or a turnover, as long as I'm consistent throughout the game, if one team does it, the other team does it, and every time I call either a blue card or every time I call a turnover, I know that will cover it. So that's really how I know all the rules.
Yeah. Toby, do you want to add anything about how you can catch everything in the game?
Yeah, to build on Chris's point, I would say that it's not possible for one person to catch every single thing that happens in a game of Quidditch. As one of my reffing mentors said to me, if you ever feel like you've reffed a perfect game, you should probably retire on the spot because it's not going to happen again. The important thing is to build that channel of communication with your ref crew so that between the 5/7 of you, you can catch most of what's going on in the game and adjudicate it fairly.
Okay. Kanto, Jeanette, do you guys have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just echo with what Chris said. I don't know all the rules, and that's just a part because the rule book changes every year, and so you gotta, sort of, toughen it out when you get into these games. And to what Chris just said about grouping, what I try to do is I try to group by what I need to get right the most, right? So that's your contact fouls, that's your dangerous play fouls, really the items that pertain to safety, right? And so if I'm going to miss all the other calls, I got to get the dangerous player right. I got to, helpless receiver, things like that. Because what you'll notice is, and people have said this in the groups before, but there's your most frequent cases like the contact fouls, and then there's the base, the corner cases like bludger on the end of a broom. I think it happened to me once in a game in a fantasy tournament, right? So really try to focus on the bigger areas of refereeing where you'll see the most calls. And then you'll see that as the game progresses, you can kind of logically get to those corner cases and what to do with them. So I would just focus on the things that happen the most when you start out.
Jeanette, anything to add?
Yeah, I agree with everyone that, the rule book is like 400 pages. You can't read the whole thing. My biggest thing when I was like looking at the rules is I look at all the cards and try to make sure I know all the cards, at least, what's yellow, blue, red. And like Chris said, grouping them into specific items. My major strategy is, if it's not something that's extremely like important, send them back to hoops. If it's something that it's a hard, like obvious tackle or obvious thing, then you're going to card. I try to make sure that the gameplay is going, so that's my biggest thing with the rules.
Yeah, I think this has all been really good advice. I didn't let any of them know about this question in advance, and you got generally the same answer. So anybody who's expecting the most experienced refs to be reffing perfect games, know that nobody can. You can aspire to be your best, and to that end, I would suggest when playing, if you still do, play with the rules in mind. It's a great way to kind of build up experience with them. And then it helps you remember as a ref. Read the appendix with lists of fouls by type. But even with that, and I'm on rules team and have been for several years, I don't know them all, and I don't plan to. I will learn all of them, and if I get into a situation I know something's wrong, hopefully and likely somebody on my ref crew will remember the exact call. But if not, we'll still try to ensure the game to be as fair as possible and call it fairly for both sides, which is another key to it. Because if you call it one way for one team, you call it the same way for the other team. Okay, next question. How do you get the most out of your referee crew? So, Toby, since you mentioned them in the last question, how would you get the most out of a referee crew?
So the thing I really like to do is have my full ref team talk as a script in my head that I can just rattle off. I find that if I'm trying to improv the things that I want to say before a game, I'll miss the stuff that's really important. It is the thing that I think is kind of unique to Quidditch is that there is such a variable level of skill for assistant referees coming in. So like I try to bootstrap them as hard as I can of like the most important things are to make sure that you're always moving with play, to make sure you're always communicating as well as you can. And then we can kind of get into the finer details of specific rules questions you have once I know that you have that baseline. Like Kanto said, like you learn so much from mistakes of like the one time I forgot to do X and then it impacted gameplay, so I always do X in every ref team meeting going forward. So like I check that my snitch referee actually knows how to blow a whistle before every single game, just because I really don't want to be in a situation where the ref can't communicate to me that there's been a snitch catch, because that has a knock-on effect for the rest of the game.
Jeanette?
My favorite thing to say to refs, or my ARs and snitch refs in my little group before we start, is that, sorry, my dog just ran in here, is that I'm only as good as they are. So I don't want to get yelled at. So please make calls. And even if you're like, even remotely seeing a call that you're not sure about, put your hand up and just let us discuss it. I try to make sure they know all the signals. So hand up and pointing to the side. So I don't call brooms down too early, because that's where we get yelled at as refs, is that when they miss their, when they miss their drive or they miss their chance to have a free play, we get yelled at by the coaches. So my favorite thing always to say is, you don't want to get yelled at, I don't want to get yelled at, so please make calls. And I make sure that they know if they have any questions about the rules. I always ask that right away. Any questions about the rules, I go over the biggest thing right now, I think, is the boundary rule. So I always go over that with them and make sure they know where the line is, where they're calling it, and how important it is to call out which beater's getting the ball right now. And that's usually what I go over with the ref crew. The biggest thing to me with my ref crew is that they are.
You cut out a little bit for me on what the biggest thing with your ref crew was. Could you say what that was? Because I imagine it was important. I think we might have lost sound on Jeanette, unless that's just on my computer. Well, our tech person will let me know if that's a thing. We will continue on. Kanto, thoughts on referee crew?
Yeah, I mean, I think Toby and Jeanette said it perfectly, those points. One thing that has helped me, and I encourage others to do, is when you get your ref crew and you do your pregame huddle, try to figure out what their strengths are. So if you have a bunch of beaters coming in as referees, or a snitch referee, odds are they're probably good at really catching beater stuff, right? So try to move them to those positions, right? And then what I'll say is, you gotta empower them, right? So when they give you explanations, it should just be for cards, right? You don't have to go through the rigmarole of telling me what happened. Just tell me red card behind the back tackle, help receiver, whatever it may be. And when you empower them, it encourages them to be more outspoken, right? And so another way that you can do that too is give them clear guideposts to refereeing, right? If you give a referee an open canvas, sometimes they'll be a little like, oh man, I should be watching everything, right? When you give them certain jobs, like, hey, just watch specifically for beaters here or that, it gives them real nice focus, right? To focus on what you think are weak points in the game. And it can really be a good way to just segment tasks out, right? And then, and the last thing I'll just say is you got to back up your referees, right? I mean, every referee is going to make bad calls. They're going to miss calls, right? But you're never going to get into a problem if you back up your referees, right? If you go by with what a captain says or a spectator says, you're just going to get into a whole lot of trouble, right? So by the end, try to back up your referees, and just really just try to make sure that they know that they have a voice on the field.
Yeah, I'll jump in here because what you said is kind of relevant to what I would say. Two major things. Obviously, I engage in kind of all the practices that you guys have said, but when you start out, I make sure to understand what their level of experience is with it. I want to know kind of, and their confidence in it as well, because there's some people I've worked with who have been officiating for a year and they're fantastic. So if they say they've been at it for 3 years, but they're not very confident, then I'll take that into account. And if they say they've been at it for a year and are extremely confident, then I'll take that into account as well. But knowing where they're starting from helps me kind of understand how much responsibility to put on their shoulders, because I don't want them overwhelmed. The other side of it, though, is I will back them up. I will not let anybody, give my crew sass. But at the same time, I do listen to the teams, not on calls. But if they're telling me that my AR is on the phone or that they're not watching for things, I'll take that referee just to the side during a stoppage, and I'll make sure they know. This is important in the context of, both getting them to get calls right, watch everything, but also in the sense of commanding the pitch, because if the teams think that they have an outlet for valid criticisms, and they think that their concerns are being taken into play, then it keeps them from just going off, in my opinion. Chris, you had anything to add to this?
I agree with what everyone said. Give clear instructions to your ref, clear boundaries. And I also differentiate the instructions I give to refs based on the skill level of the refs in front of me. So based on, if I've got refs who it's their first ever game, I'm going to give one instruction, which might be like, watch beats, call beats. That's all I need you to call are beats. And then let me know if something physical happens and you think it's illegal. The other thing that I like to do is I try to use very familiar assistant reffing systems, especially for new refs, because I don't want them so focused on keeping track of what system I'm running that they're forgetting to watch the game in front of them. So I know that quadrant system is not always used by a lot of refs, but I like to use it because most ARs are very comfortable in that quadrant system type of reffing. And so they don't have to focus on keeping track of what system I'm running, but rather keeping track of the game.
Okay, great. We'll move on. So time management is important, I think. Everybody is used to games that either are starting late, not always the referee's fault, but based on the ref test rubric, it always is. And then just the pacing of play as far as stoppages and things like that. So I just wanted us to touch a little bit on this, how you deal with it, why you think it's important. Kanto, why don't you take us?
Yeah, I'll just mention two things. Obviously, during stoppages, I'd like to keep a rule in my head: 15 seconds or less, right? So if I'm going beyond 15 seconds, it's an issue. And what I've noticed why this is important is that the longer these stoppages go on, the chippier the players get. I feel like that's always been the case with my games, and because they're just kind of just sitting there, just like, what's going on, what's the rule here. And so if you can keep it to 15 seconds or less and get that game moving, they'll appreciate it way more. And to the point about how to manage time during this, I think a lot of the time also spent explaining calls to coaches. Now you do owe them an explanation to the rule, but you don't owe them a long explanation to it, right? So what I always do to cut this time is I'll say what I say. If they have any feedback, I'll say, happy to talk with you after the game. Just need to get this game going on right now, but more than happy to talk about why I made this call. And they're more than appreciative to do that after the game. Now, obviously, some might care that it's impacting you right now, but there's nothing you can do, right? You've made your decision, move on, get the game going. So those are 2 points I don't want to make about time.
Okay. Jeanette, is your sound working again?
Is it?
It is. Go ahead.
Yay. My biggest thing with time is making sure the timekeepers are being loud to me. It's not always to look down at your watch constantly to check the time. So I'm usually yelling out, time check, so that the coaches aren't constantly bugging them. So I tell my coaches that my timekeeper should be yelling out every 5 minutes, because that's my goal. I tell my timekeeper to do that. That's what I want. And making sure that they're being loud. And if I think it's been past 5 minutes, I'll usually yell out so that the coaches aren't bugging the timekeeper. And then also, I try to keep my meetings short and sweet. I've been in Cantos ref meetings before, and I loved how he ran them, and making sure that your refs your ARs are confident coming in and accepting their rule.
Okay, Toby.
Yeah, to build on that, I think it's like a key responsibility of the head referee to keep the ref huddles from going on too long. So one way I try to manage that is like, especially if I've got less experienced assistant referees, is to not like lead them to their decisions, but ask like very concise questions to extract the information that I need. And just like to keep it moving. And that also means that there are times where you hit the point of, hey, I think a foul may have happened, but we just don't have enough information. Let's keep moving. Let's keep the game going. In all likelihood, the game will not hinge on a single foul. And so if we can't make the call, let's not spend 15 minutes reviewing every single thing that possibly could have happened.
Okay. Chris, anything?
Kanto mentioned this earlier, but one thing that I like when my ARs do is the only things I really want to hear in a ref meeting are the player, the player's jersey number, the team, and what they did. That's all I need to know from an assistant referee, because I trust them completely. So if they come in and say number 23 on the red team tackled from behind, I say, okay. And the card's coming out. So the one thing is just to trust your assistant referees to do their job. And honestly, if you can't trust them to do their job, I mean, you have to have a conversation with them. And Toby's right. You have to ask clarifying questions as a head referee quite often. Sometimes if someone comes and goes, I think a foul happened, having really good, precise questions to ask them. Okay, so what foul do you think happened? Okay, so did this happen? Did that happen? Okay, neither of those things happened, so it's not illegal, the thing you're describing, or the way you're describing it. And that's for ref-based stoppages. Also, I don't call a ref meeting for every call. Like if I see a foul, I just stop play. I point the player. I say, "What's your jersey number?" They tell me, and then I make the call. I don't need to call in. And I also try to limit the number of refs in a ref huddle. So if I have the entire field coming into my ref huddle and I have not requested that they all come into my ref huddle, my first question is, did you see anything? If they say no, I ask them to leave the ref huddle, because I don't need all of those hands in there. I just need the people who saw fouls into that huddle. And in terms of how to be a good AR, there's a great panel right after this one about how to be a fantastic, effective AR, and I plan on attending that one.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. I think then the thing I most want to touch on is just why it's important, which is largely that if you take forever in these huddles and you have these long discussions, as much as we mentioned that you don't know all the rules, we know a lot of it. But if people see you discussing something for 5 minutes, they start to lose confidence in you. And if people, the players, the coaches, do not think are not confident in your abilities, then it's going to result in the game getting more and more out of control. So as much as people might say that it is, take your time, get the right call, there is such a thing as taking too much time. So ultimately, I think it's be efficient with your time, take exactly as much time as you need, make the right call, and don't take longer than that. And so that goes with ref meetings, but it also does go with any other stoppages. A timeout with if there's after an injury stoppage. There's things that obviously you're not going to rush. You're not going to rush an injured player off the field. But if players ran to get water and then they're taking their sweet time getting back to their rooms, just make it clear that that's not acceptable. Teams will, some of them may want to get a break. They've been playing a lot of games that day, and walking back to their rooms may speed that up. Don't be afraid to start the game while they're walking back to their rooms. Give them a warning, but it definitely helps keep the pitch in their command. It makes sure that they know they have a referee who's doing their job, and tournament directors will love you. That, I guess, is the unsung part of it as well. Okay, I'll take us on to the next slide. Okay, how do you deal with people confronting you or your crew as a referee? This can include players who are complaining about a call, coaches who are looking for explanations, or fans who are jeering and obnoxious. Chris, why don't you start us out?
Yeah, I got a lot of opinions on this one. I'll try to be concise about it. One of the things I have going in my favor, which not everyone has, so I'm just saying this so that you understand my context, is that I'm pretty big and pretty tall. So I don't necessarily encounter a lot of hecklers that I have to worry about. But a couple of things I do. If it's fans heckling, I just ignore them. They have no impact on the game. They're not a player. They're not a coach. They're not interacting directly with the game. So I just ignore when it's fans. If it's players or coaches, it generally depends on how they're confronting me. So if they're asking a question about a call, hey, what's the call? Or something like that, I'll answer it. But I always try to remind myself to only answer questions. If I hear a coach yell, that's a bad call, that's not a question. I do not need to answer it. I'm not going to answer it. But also when refs come out or when coaches come out to speak to me and they try to argue with a call, I have a simple refrain that I use quite often, and I'm always willing to back it up, which is arguing with me. The only thing arguing with me will do is earn your team another card. Do you want to earn another card or do you want to go back to the bench? And then most of the time, the coaches pick the going back to the bench option out of those two fantastic options for them.
Okay. So Jeanette, you probably don't have the be a big person defense. How do you deal with this?
No, I'm quite small. One of the biggest things I think just coming from a woman ref that, men don't respect you as much on the pitch. So it's a big thing of being confident in your calls. And so when a coach comes up and talks to me, I respect their time. I let them talk to me. I usually let both my coaches. I answered one of the questions in the Q&A also this way, that I usually let my coaches and players talk to me. But if it's them yelling at me, I don't usually listen to them. I'm like, you can talk to me in respectful tone. Confronting people as much, it's usually just, I saw what I saw, my AR saw what they saw, I'm going to make the right call. If you have problems, you can talk to me after. And that's usually where I go. If it's a coach asking me nicely, can you ask your ARs to watch this? I usually command the pitch and make sure everyone can hear. I'm not a loud person. So the best thing you can do as a ref is work on your yelling. I've been at tournaments that I don't have a voice, but I can still be commanding on the pitch. So it's really all about confidence and coming across as loud and as, commanding as you can. And there's been times that, you're called, I don't think we're allowed to swear, but you guys can use your mind as to what I've been called. And you just have to understand that, you are the ref that, you read the rule book, you passed the HR test, the coach did not most of the time. And you just have to be confident in your calls and know what you're calling. There's coaches that will come out just to argue with you, whatever. And I'm usually just like, no, I'm making this call. And that's the best way I've gone about doing it.
Okay. Kanto?
Yeah, I mean, to Chris's point, I think, I do draw the line when it comes to my crew. Usually I have pretty thick skin with hecklers in the crowd, people who know me, who just do it just to get me riled up. But when it comes to my ref crew, I really stand pat with that. And so, I will warn captains, listen, if you have anything to say to my crew, let me know first and we'll work it out. There are a lot of people who do those offhand comments that Chris talked about, which is like, was a bad call, ref, whatever. And, through the years, I've had some ways of sort of combating that. And one way that I quickly do it is I actually stop the game really quickly, like 2 whistles, and be like, can you repeat your question again? And then they usually don't say anything because it wasn't a question, right? And say, okay, great. And then I just get the game moving. So a lot of these times it's not about, it's really just about, are you giving me a valid criticism of my reffing and the question? If you're not, then we're just going to move on, right? And so that's what I kind of want to hammer with these players. Like we can have a cordial conversation on the pitch. I'm more than receptive to what you have to say, but there is a line here, right? So if you give me that respect, I'll give you that respect too, and that latitude to give me the feedback that I need to help you in the game. So I think those two things are really, really important.
Now, just I kind of want you to add on that, just in terms of your relationship with those players on the pitch. Like, is it always I'm the boss or what?
I'll say this, and I think it's just more akin to me just being in the league for 9 years, right? People just know me and they know the kind of ref I am. And And obviously that's a benefit. And for people who are just reffing now, it's hard for them to do that. I've never tried to be I'm an authority on the pitch person here, right? I've always tried to err on the side of I'm going to control the game as best I can and keep you guys safe. But I want it to be a physical game or what have you. And so the relationship is, I just want those players to understand when I come into a game and I ref, nothing's personal. I'm just trying to ref the game in the fairest and safest way that I can. We're going to disagree on things, but at the end of the day, I have to make a call, right? And so if the players understand that part of it, they're not going to take your calls personally. And you know what? We see it differently, we move on, right? And kind of to that point, after games is when I really have that powwow session, right? So before the game, I try to err on the side of, as an authority professional, as Toby put it. At the end of the game with the coaches and the players, I try to be more human. Like, hey, this is what I saw in this call. This is why my ref crew said we came to the decision. If they can understand the human element of what you're doing on the pitch, that'll be a payoff later when you ref them or other people in their league or whatever. So that's what I try to, it's not just a facade. Like you don't want to be like, I'm going to make all the rules here, right? You are just trying to be there as an arbiter. And so try not to get in your own head on that. So what I say is take your job seriously, but don't take yourself seriously in the refereeing position.
Okay. Toby, do you have anything to add?
I think I would add that just you can set these expectations during your captain's meeting. You can lay the ground rules of how you want communication to flow. Like I'll tell captains, I don't mind any player or captain asking any referee a polite yes or no question, but if the questions stop being polite, then we're going to reevaluate that relationship. And like Kanto and Chris have said, there's like, you always, and Jeanette, I think also said this, you can always come back to like, hey, we don't have time to talk about this right now. Talk to me about it after the game. I think that's all I have to add. Everyone's been making the points that I would make.
Yeah, I agree with all of it, especially Kanto's point on kind of standing up for my ref crew, because I've got a thick skin about all this, but a lot of them will not. A lot of them will not have the tools to deal with it, and even from the standpoint that they may respond in a way that can make things worse. So if you get out in front of that, you keep a situation from snowballing on you. But I would add one thing, that is to listen to what the people are saying. Don't just dismiss it. There is something that is causing them to feel this way. And if it's something that you can rectify, a great example is just like the spectators not understanding calls that are going on. They're getting very angry that it's going wrong for their team, and it's just because the calls have not been communicated well to them. So in the past, I've done it where either I, as an AR or as an HR, asked my AR to just relay the calls that were being made a little bit louder so that the spectators could hear them. And that actually stopped that in some situations, where it did not work and the spectators were just being jerks. I stopped the game and I would not resume it until the TD had those hecklers removed, because there's a point where it is impossible to deal with. Now that is an extreme and I would not recommend it in most situations, but it is also important to know what recourses you have in an extreme situation. That way you're not floundering when you run into those. Okay, let's move on. So we're going to watch a 20-second clip, and we're going to talk about advantage in general, because I think it is one of the most miscalled tools in a referee's toolbox, and I want to fix that. Okay, I did not start where I wanted to, so I think it's over here. Sorry about that. Timestamps did not work well. Yep, it's right here. Okay. So the foul we see here, 2 arms behind the back. We got an advantage call from our fabulous Chris Lecomte, and there's a goal. So I'm going to stop it here, and we're going to talk about it. Now, I was looking for some film that had a much more drawn-out advantage call. Unfortunately, the referees I had submitting were only submitting film of themselves, and were all quite competent referees, so they weren't giving me bad examples. Now, that being said, I think that there's ways this was done right and ways this were done wrong. So, Chris, you were the ref for it, so why don't you give us your feedback on your own performance right here?
Yeah, so you're right. It's a 2-arm wrap is the call that's going to come out here. The chaser gets 1 arm and then reaches around with the other to try and steal the quaffle, and it's a 2-arm wrap. And I saw a couple of players that might help them around, so I threw the advantage flag in the event that they could break the tackle, or the event that they could pass it to a teammate, and then that teammate could score, and that's what happened. The only reason I need to do that is because I've seen plays like this 100 times where teams have had the chance to recover out of that kind of foul and then go ahead and score. And then what's going to happen is if they do score, then the penalty time will get negated by the goal here. But yeah, that's exactly the call I made and why I made it.
Kendo, why don't you talk to us about how, like, the philosophy behind advantage?
Yeah, so I've often said that advantage is similar to your soccer advantage, right? There are some elements to hockey delayed penalty as well in there, but the philosophy is you don't want to give a benefit to the defending fouling team on a drive where there could be a score, right? So you're trying to let the play run out so that the offended team gets a chance at an advantage. And so what it's not in there though is it's not intended to be like a hockey delayed advantage, which is arm up. We're going to wait until the defense gets possession, right? That's not what this is in Quidditch, right? It has to be an immediate action after the foul, right? So you can't really give them time to set up an offense per se. Like they can't then start passing it backwards to their keeper and then progressing down the field. So the thought is that, once the advantage abates, right, that's when you can stop play. So usually what happens is obviously there's a turnover that'll stop play, but once they start moving backwards or something similar to that, that's when you can stop play and just administer the foul. But that's in a nutshell what it should be. Yeah.
So I'm not going to be able to get everyone in on every question anymore because we're running low on time. So with what Canto said in mind, the one note I had on this call is that it should not have been an advantage at the start. Once the advantage was called, it was timed perfectly. It didn't go on a second longer than it needed to. But in my view, because the player was not moving at the time of the illegal contact made, and the only reason they got out was because the player released when they realized they had 2 hands, it could have been called there if the player had been in motion and driving in. But the defending team did not gain advantage by having a stoppage there. The player who was illegally wrapped would have gained an advantage by the player wrapping them, getting out of the way, there being 1 fewer defender. That being said, in the moment, it is very hard because it's about a 1-second time frame between when he makes the wrap and when he lets it go. And in the moment, it is very hard to make that instantaneously. So if you do not get that call off before the player is released, then absolutely following that up with advantage and letting it play out as Chris did is the best thing. But in a perfect world, which will happen 1% of the time, that could have been a just straight call and not an advantage call right there. Okay. Chris, you think that was a fair assessment?
Very fair assessment.
Okay. We're going to move on to the next question. So what do you do to communicate on the pitch and how do you do it? So Jeanette, you mentioned yelling before, so why don't you start us off on this?
Yeah, like I said, I'm more of a quiet person, usually at least once in the game or a lot on my ref test. I get told, I need to be louder. which is difficult when your voice just does not carry as well, and it might be the high pitch part or whatever. But even so, even if you can't be super loud, you can still communicate. So I'm usually communicating with my ARs at all times, like, hey, can you speak up louder? Hey, make sure you're calling numbers. Hey, get closer to the plate. Because a lot of problems with ARs is that they're at the edge of the pitch and they're not in the play. So usually I'm communicating with them what I already told them earlier, but especially if I think I'm missing beats or I'm missing calls, communicating with the sideline, coaches coming up and talking to me, and I'm like, okay, go back to your bench. I get it. And talking to the timekeeper and scorekeep to make sure they're right and checking like that. And that's the biggest thing to me, making sure you have the right whistle blows, and having a Fox 40 is like key to a ref. But yeah.
All right, Toby, thoughts on this?
Yeah, to build on what Jeanette said, like I sort of came into reffing with an advantage in that like I was trained as a singer, as a theater person. So like the idea of diaphragmatic breathing was already like something I was comfortable with, but like it helps you communicate to like figure out how to breathe and really project your voice. Because if you're trying to communicate in the way that like we think of as like screaming, where it's coming from the top of your range, you're going to burn out even faster. The reffing communication we want sort of has to come from the low range and like the actual power of your diaphragm pushing the sound out, rather than just being able to like make a lot of sound in a manner that's going to shred your throat. Not that you won't shred your throat in like a 3 or 4 day tournament anyway, but it'll give you longevity in your communication.
So I just add 2 things to this. The first is the communication using warnings rather than just, making the call and having a penalty associated with it are very important. So if you can tell somebody or give them a back to hoops during play without having to stop it, it both keeps the game moving, makes teams less angry, and keeps the game fair. And then also is nonverbal communication. Point at players who are knocked out. Use any hand signals, especially your goal and no goal signals, to make sure that teams and your ref crew, scorekeeper included, has a backup. I have worked with a deaf scorekeeper before, and they let me know, and I made sure I was being very, very clear with my hand signals and holding them up a little bit longer to ensure that that game was working the best it could. And honestly, they were a fantastic scorekeeper. I just needed to make sure that they have the tools that they needed in order to do their job properly. Okay, we're going to move on again. So, dangerous situations happen. How do you ensure everyone, including yourself, is safe? The situations I particularly am thinking about is people charging around the pitch, how you protect yourself from getting hit, and then also fights or other things like that. Kanto, why don't you start us off?
Yeah, I mean, gladly I haven't really gotten to situations where it's gotten to a fight, but there are points where it's gotten boiling, and you have to sort of calm emotions down a little bit, and that's really just about game management and to what I said before about time management, where you're trying to get the game moving, right, and you're trying to lessen that tension. I will say that with teams that are especially very physical, you definitely have to watch out for yourself on the pitch. And so like I've had to cover certain parts of my body to make sure that I'm not getting blasted. But what I just want to make sure that you do, at the very least, you should really try to make sure that the spectators are safe. And so any like things that are boiling near like spectators, you really have to put that out really quickly. But to the point about fights, never really something I have to deal with, but something I'm always watching out for.
Okay. Jeanette, as a smaller person, how do you keep yourself safe?
As a smaller person who's also a klutz, it's not very easy. I'm usually aware of where the ball is and what's going on, so you kind of have to use your peripherals and everything. There's been many times that I've been smoked in the face by a blood, just by not ducking fast enough or not moving fast enough, but usually I'm keeping a safe distance from the person with the ball and me, like in enough space that you can see the ball, see the play, see what a tackle is going to look like, but also know that you're not going to get tackled in the meantime, because what use are you if you're getting tackled by the tackle and not being able to see it? So maintaining your space, I think, is the biggest thing there.
Okay, so we're just about out of time, so I'm just going to touch on fights for about 10 seconds, which is to say, don't put yourself in danger. Use whistles, get the people's attention back on you and away from the person that they want to fight with. If they want to fight with you, just disengage and don't participate. Removing the kind of cause of their anger is the best way to calm down those fights. You should never put yourself in a situation where you are physically in danger to prevent it. And yeah, if you keep the game from getting to that point, that's the best situation, but protect yourself. So we are out of time. We're not going to be able to get to Q&A in here. I'm going to go in and answer some questions in the chat or in the Slack. So if you have any questions that you want answered, just post it in the Slack for this, and we'll answer everything we can. Okay. Thank you for for participating and coming to our panel.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for coming.
Guys.